As a senior manager, have you ever been in a business meeting with native speakers and thought, I don't know what they're talking about? In this episode today, I hope to help you feel more confident by breaking down some difficult business expressions so you can finally understand what they mean. Let's crack on. Hello and welcome to Confident Business English. If you're a senior manager and you already use English but you really want to build your confidence, you are in exactly the right place. My name is Anna, I'm a neurolanguage coach, and I've been working with professionals for over 8 years on their English communication. This podcast, then, I'd like you to think about as a weekly training program where I touch on some of the most challenging parts that you tell me you face on a day-to-day basis with English. Each episode, which is its own little unit, I hope helps move you a little bit closer towards your overall goal, which is to build more confidence. And at the end of the day, really, a lot of the time, more confidence in your English communication is more freedom. Freedom from the things that are holding you back, the stress, the anxiety, the mental energy with English, and also the freedom to do whatever you want. So let's dive in and look at the problem we're tackling today. And this is something I hear all the time from clients, and I bet that you experience something similar too. Anna, I can follow more or less in the meetings, and then a native speaker comes along and suddenly I've lost everything. Isn't it ironic that actually sometimes native speakers can be the worst communicators? Not because they're trying to make life difficult for you. Often it's just simply a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding that actually, communicating in another language is quite challenging. I do want to challenge you here, though, on something that I've seen can really knock professionals' confidence. Often what I find with clients is it's almost as if they give native speakers a level of authority or superiority just because they're a native speaker. If this is a belief that you feel you have, I'd really encourage you to try to look at it differently. You're both in the same room. You're both trying to solve the same problem. You both have a role to play. Having said that, even if you can't necessarily control how they speak, and unless you want to bring it up with them and talk about perhaps how you could communicate better, which I know could be a little bit awkward in some situations, what is within your control is to learn some of the most common business phrases so that you don't have, or at least you increase the likelihood of having that really horrible feeling where you can't really follow what's being said. Maybe you get that kind of fight or flight situation. You're just trying to catch up, your survival mode, let's say. The challenge for you as well as a senior manager is you're often not in a meeting in a passive role just to listen and you take notes. That would be great. You're there to add value, influence the discussion, ask questions, make decisions. So of course, if you're not following what's being said, that's an issue. And I totally understand that that could leave you feeling very anxious and frustrated. But let's try and take some practical steps to address that today. I've cherry-picked my list of difficult business phrases, and for each one I'm going to explain what it means, the simple version, the origin, if that's interesting and relevant, and any tricks about how to remember it and nuances when you use it. And stick around for the last one because it's a little bit of a funny one, might be a little bit rude, but I think you'll find it quite entertaining. Here we go. First one. We're in the world of implementation. Have you ever heard somebody say something like, we need to roll out our new software across all the regions? To roll out. This is literally just a fancy way of saying introduce gradually. You could imagine it like rolling out a carpet. Or when you drop a rock in water and there's a ripple, and the ripple gradually goes out. The change doesn't happen everywhere at once, it gradually spreads. Moving on to talk about preparation. Imagine somebody in the room is talking about the final 2 quarters of the year. And they say, we're really gearing up for a busy final 2 quarters. Gearing up for, G-E-A-R, up and for, 3-part phrasal verb. This is just a fancy way of saying get ready for. As this is a weird phrasal verb that basically makes no sense, the origin here is important And it actually comes from putting on your gear before doing something difficult. Now, here, automatically, I go to the military, your gear, your trousers, your jacket, your equipment, your protective clothing. We call that gear. If you go hiking and go to the mountain, you may be familiar with that term, right? You need the right gear. You need the boots, you need the jacket, you need the waterproof. Imagine soldiers putting on all their equipment before heading into battle to gear up for something, to get ready for something. The nuance here is that it needs to be something larger scale. For example, if I was going to say, I'm just gearing up for the meeting, it would sound a little bit out of context because it's not large scale, right? We're gearing up for the final 2 quarters. Now we're talking. Next, let's move on to problem solving. You're sitting around the table, you're in a meeting, and somebody says, we're just ironing out a few operational issues. Ironing out. This is just a fancy way of saying resolving or fixing. The key word here is iron, and if you're familiar with that, IRON, this is the appliance that you use to remove the creases from your clothes, that horrible linen shirt that no matter how many times you seem to iron it, the creases never come out. You're making something that's creased smooth. Problems resolved. Iron out. Next, let's move into the world of developing ideas. Imagine you're writing a proposal or a tender, and somebody in the room says, we need to flesh this out a bit more. We need to flesh it out. And you're like, okay, great. Would you mind just giving me a bit of background? What does that actually mean? Well, it is just a fancy way of saying to add more substance or detail. Flesh is on your body. It's your muscles. Imagine your report is just a skeleton. That's the basic structure. When you flesh it out, you're putting the muscles, the skin, the detail, the things that bring it to life. So to flesh something out is to add more substance. Definitely in the world of reports, documents, that's where you're going to hear this type of thing. Or maybe a presentation that you're preparing for a client, for example. Staying with reports this time, imagine another colleague in the room says, I think we should definitely flesh out this section, but let's not add too much. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a little bit of overkill. It's going to be a little bit of overkill. Noun. This is just a more complex way of saying more than necessary. The origin here is, it used to be referred also in a military context to using more force than necessary, and it just kind of evolved, and now it means doing much more than is needed. Just too much. Definitely in the context of writing, and also maybe perhaps if you're presenting something as well, like if you're going to go into too much detail, and somebody might be like, I just think it's a bit of overkill, to be honest. Next, let's move to budgets. You're talking about the budget next year, and one of your native colleagues from London, let's say, says, I really think we need to earmark some of these funds for next year's expansion. And in your head, you're like, okay, ear, great, got that. Something on the head. So I'm not quite putting 2 and 2 together there. Well, it is just a fancy way of saying to assign for a specific purpose. The origin here is really important because it explains it and it makes perfect sense. Historically, farmers used to mark animals by cutting a very small notch in their ears to show ownership. As time has gone on, what it means is just marking and assigning something for a specific purpose. In this case, to earmark money for something. We need to earmark some money for the Christmas party, or we need to earmark these funds for training next year. Assign money. Here's a quick one. New context, task management. One of your colleagues say, how should we divvy up the tasks? Well, it's actually much more straightforward. It just means divide. Divvy up. It's definitely informal. It's definitely casual, but you might hear somebody say that. How should we divvy up the tasks here? Just means to divide. Next, let's move on and have a look at expression, very common in business when we want to talk about understanding, which is to gauge, Gauge. A difficult one, right? If you don't know what it means. Let's imagine a situation where you as a business or a company are deciding what changes you need to make to improve the culture at the office, for example. One of your HR colleagues might say, well, before we make any changes, we really need to gauge how people are feeling. This just very simply means we need to understand how people are feeling. But there is a little bit of a nuance here. A gauge is an instrument we use to measure something. Probably one of the most common gauges that you will see on a daily basis is in your car. In fact, maybe right now you are listening to this, driving to or from work, and you're going to see that gauge telling you how much fuel you have or battery left in your car. That is a gauge. In which case then, gauge means when we're trying to understand the level of something. Employee engagement, customer satisfaction, market interest. To gauge how the team is feeling, it's not simply we need to understand the problem. Does that make sense? So yes, it's understand, but with the nuance of understanding the level of something. Next, let's think about difficult conversations. You might hear somebody in a meeting say, I don't really know how to broach this with the client. BROACH. Broach this. This is essentially just a fancy way of saying bring up or raise. I don't know how to raise this sensitive topic. The origin here is really interesting because it comes from a French word, an old French word, which is for a sharp tool that pierces something. The idea being that you're kind of carefully opening or piercing a difficult topic. So to broach, think about it like you're just gently kind of opening the door to the difficult conversation or issue. I don't know how to broach it with the client. I don't know how to bring it up. Last but not least, I want to talk about something that native speakers might say when everything goes wrong. Heads up, the next expression does contain a swear word, and I'm mentioning it purely for educational purposes. You may hear it in the workplace. These things happen. Sometimes people talk like that, especially when they're in casual, colloquial conversations, which is why I want to share it with you, because these sorts of things are also important so you can really get the nuance of what people are trying to say. So imagine it's Friday afternoon. Your client has cancelled the contract. Great. Your supplier has also gone bankrupt. Perfect. And the CEO wants to have an emergency meeting. Wonderful. What else could you want on a Friday afternoon before the weekend? Your colleague might say, my goodness, shit has really hit the fan. Shit has really hit the fan. What does this mean? Well, you can probably tell, if you've got that visual in your mind, everything has suddenly gone very badly wrong. And I think this is quite memorable, actually, because imagine throwing some type of excrement into spinning blades and watching it then spread out all over a space. That would be kind of a bad situation. So I think it's pretty easy to remember that one. Now, you would hear this, of course, in a very colloquial, casual conversation between trusted colleagues. This is not something that you're going to blurt out in the middle of a meeting, but there you go. I just thought you might like that one. All right, that brings us to the end of the episode today. I hope that there was something that you could take away. Perhaps it's a phrase that you've heard before and you're like, okay, right, I get it now. Often it's a case of just, these are some of the fancy ways of saying it that you might hear from a native speaker, but the concept really isn't that challenging once you break it down. Once you build up a repertoire of these phrases, meetings become easier to follow, conversations become a little bit less stressful, and you start to feel more confident when you're going into that. As an action for you this week, remember that the podcast is the great first step, but if you really want to learn this and take it forward, I'd encourage you to see if you can go out there, observe, see if you can listen out for some of these phrases, notice when somebody uses them, And you never know, if the opportunity comes up, you could have a go at using it yourself. Small, little improvements like that repeated consistently over time. This is what is going to build up your confidence in the long term. Thank you so much, as always, for squeezing in some time in your busy schedule to get your confident business English in this week. If you found that episode really useful, don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And I will see you same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.